thank you so much for joining this really interesting and important discussion today, which is part of IPI's events and activities to mark World Press Freedom Day tomorrow. So we're getting a head start already today. Today's event is a special panel looking at the next steps for media freedom and independence in Central Europe, where media have faced a number of challenges in the past year, especially around the issue of media capture, with Hungary being at the forefront of that troubling development. But we've seen several elections around the region that have raised new questions about where things may be headed in terms of media freedom. We have a really fantastic panel of high-level editors here with us today to share their expertise from 5 different countries. I'm going to introduce them briefly. So we're joined today by Márton Gergely, who is the editor-in-chief of the independent magazine HVG in Hungary, and also a member of the IPI board. We have Ali Žerdin, who's the editor of the Saturday supplement of the daily newspaper Delo in Slovenia. We're also joined by Johana Hovorková, who is the editor-in-chief of Forum 24 in the Czech Republic, and Michał Broniatowski, who is a contributor to Onet and Politico in Poland. We're also very fortunate to have as our moderator today Beata Balogová, who's the editor-in-chief of Daily SME in Slovakia and also an IPI board member. So we have really a lot of excellent expertise with us today. Just a few housekeeping notes before we start. We will have a chance, we'll be going through a discussion with the speakers first, but we will have a chance to, you will have a chance to ask questions. So as we go through the conversation, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. Later, you'll also have a chance to ask questions verbally if you would like. So when we get to that point, feel free to raise your hand. And I just wanted to also mention, yes, please make sure that your microphone is always on mute during the discussion. And finally, we are recording this event as we want to be able to share these thoughts later on to those who weren't able to make it. So just keep that in mind as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over the microphone, so to speak, to Beata to take us through this really interesting discussion today. So thank you so much, Beata. Welcome again to everyone who joined us.
Thank you, Scott, so much, and good afternoon to all who joined us. I will start with a short note that if we were wondering how far autocrats might go in their effort to capture media and wage war without public control, Vladimir Putin just served as the worst case scenario. And now we as journalists are not only covering the war and its horrors, not only trying to bring exact data, but we are also are asking the question, how did it happen that the Russian society got to the point that its larger part is approving basically Putin's war? And of course, part of the answer is the suffocation of free press. And it has never been just Russia's problem. It's only now that it's spilled over the border and we are experiencing it on our skin, especially not in a region where Putin has his allies, even among countries, member countries of the European Union, and not in a region where the regime of Viktor Orbán, even though it does not murder journalists as Putin does, but the effect of his propaganda empire can be comparable to those full-blooded autocracies or the communist regime. And as Scott mentioned, we have seen key elections in the region over the past year. We have seen Babiš losing in the Czech Republic. We have seen elections in Slovenia, and in Hungary, Orbán has got yet another 2/3 majority. But the war in Ukraine, in combination with these elections, give us really a urgent context to discuss. And as Scott mentioned, I'm so happy that we have our excellent colleagues to discuss these questions. So I will turn to Márton first, and I will ask him to share his thoughts on the yet another two-third majority of Viktor Orbán and what it means for the already strained media environment in Hungary. Are journalists losing hope, or they are thinking, working on some strategies how to survive yet another Orbán term in the country? Márton?
Yes, well, the result is hard to digest for sure. And I think one of the problems we face is that in the debate following the elections, the role of the media just got to the center stage. So how did Orbán manage this two-third majority, although he had a pandemic to face with no real success? If we look at the numbers under the Hungarian. So if we look at the pandemic numbers in Hungary, and then there was a war where he was in friends with the wrong side. So that was two main challenges for him ahead of the Hungarian elections. Actually, you would argue it would make him more difficult to reach an overwhelming majority, and which ended in his biggest victory yet. So how do we explain it? And as I see, a huge part of the explanation goes into the direction of media and media capture. The fact that about 1/3 of the Hungarian population doesn't get any other news, only that controlled by the Hungarian government. So they don't get both sides of every story. We had a survey in our magazine after the elections, how many people were reached by blatant lies of the Hungarian government, for example, that they handled the pandemic extraordinarily good, or that the Hungarian opposition would send troops into Ukraine, and that Hungarian sons would die in the Ukrainian war if the Hungarian opposition would come to power. And as we see that a huge part of the population was reached by those messages, an overwhelming majority of them, and even part of the oppositional voters believed the lies the Hungarian government was spreading the last few weeks ahead of the vote. So the total control, message control, the Hungarian government has managed to have is one of the main reasons people think why he achieved this victory. I think that is the winning of this argument is just as dangerous to the Hungarian media as Orbán's reign has proven to be in the last few years, because this would mean that oppositional politicians will seek to establish their own message controlling systems and not backing free media. And that Janša or Borisov or others or Babiš would be led to believe that the problem was not that they followed Orbán's steps, but the problem was they didn't follow it consequent enough. That you have to make a few more steps towards the total control Orbán's having. Since the elections, we've seen that they are not really trying to consolidate, so they don't step back from their path. We now know that one of the last remaining independent radio stations is due to shut down in September. Radio Tilos. At the same time, we hear more and more stories about supplemental propaganda outlets being shut down in these weeks because they are not needed for some time. So this is what's happening right now. I think every journalist and every journalist asks himself why this happened and how to keep on working, because it is quite sure that this election was won by lies. The most important lie was that the Hungarian opposition would send troops into Ukraine. Now we are those who are fact-checking things. We are those who want to show every side of the story. If a message wins an election which is not true, that also means that somehow our reach or our capability to fact-check the government is not working. So this is for sure a question we have to deal with. So it is hard. The other thing is that we somehow are in the repeat modus, that we are every 4 years. We are after every 4 years, looking to ask ourselves how a more democratic public sphere can be established, and 4 years after 4 years we face yet another blow to that idea. So this is still a progress. We are not there yet to that I could somehow tell you any results of it.
Thank you so much, Márton. And yes, I imagine that part of the society blames the still existing independent media for the result, and I can imagine that it opens up very serious self-searching questions within the media as well, and also questions, where are the limits of journalism and where activism starts. So I can imagine that you all facing a very, very difficult period. But I believe that discussion might be also very, very important. I will now turn to Ali, and we already mentioned the populist leader Janša several times. He was a close ally of Orbán, and he has lost elections. So how do you interpret his loss and what it means for the media in your country? Is it enough actually that a populist leader is ousted for like a renewal process for free press to start?
Good afternoon from Ljubljana. So why Janša was defeated? Because definitely he was not efficient. He was not efficient in terms of managing pandemic. Well, on the other side, Viktor Orbán was not efficient in managing pandemic too, but there are probably some differences. First one, in Slovenia, daily papers remained independent. Second one, an attempt of Janša's government to make damage to Slovenian press agency was very costly for him, and the consequence of this attempt to make damage to Slovenian press agency was a huge, significant mobilization of solidarity inside of society to support Slovenian press agency and to assure the existence of Slovenian press agency. Third, Janša was not successful in attempt to take over the most important commercial television station, Pop TV. They are owned by Czech capital at the moment. Before they were owned by United States capital, and Pop TV assured pretty professional, impartial pre-election coverage of pre-election campaign. Next, Janša was successful in takeover of public broadcaster, but during pre-election campaign, during pre-election shows on public television, it occurred that guys who were responsible to be television presenters during pre-election television confrontation were unprofessional, were amateurs, and especially last television confrontation on public broadcaster was more similar to Monty Python show than to serious television event, serious pre-election television campaign event. Especially Janša was not successful in assuring professional resources during this attempt of overtaking public broadcaster. On the other side, at this very moment, we do not have new ruling coalition yet. And beside this, Janša has still powerful tools to assure influence in public broadcaster television Slovenia. How it looks like. We have a television show with 30 years of tradition named Studio City. It was launched at the end of 80s. It was probably first professionally made politically independent show that started before the change of regime. The presenter of this show, who is a presenter for 2 decades, Marcel Štefančič, did not get a new contract for next month, and because of the fact that he is freelancer, there is no need that he would be fired from public broadcaster. So there exists a possibility that this show would lose its presenter. Marcel Štefančič, friend of mine, he's public intellectual for more than 3.5 decades. He was very brave during communist regime as editor of student newspaper. And beside this, he's author of more than 100 of books. His show is combining dreams of every chief director of public broadcaster. On one side, his television show is not expensive. On other side, the ratings of this show are enormous for this type of television show. Today he announced that he's ready to work without contract for free for next 3 months, hoping that in this 3 months situation will be fixed on the way that he will be able to go on the same way as in last 20 years. So if we are speaking about Janša's defeat, there are many combinations. First, he was unsuccessful in attempt to overtake all the major media, especially daily newspapers. He was unsuccessful in assuring influence on main commercial television. And third point, when he tried to overtake public television, he made it in a way that it was, I would say, more funny than scary. And the way how last television show before our elections went on was a pure illustration about the consequences of the way how Janša was managing this country in last 2 years. It was similar to once again Monty Python show, not to serious pre-election debate.
Thank you, Ali. If I understand correctly, so he was stopped just at the right time before he really would have managed to spread his influence in the media, and what you just said about public broadcasters and the state television, because in many countries we can call it state television. It's similar also in Slovakia with political nominations and political pressures. But I will turn now to Johana, and as I mentioned before, last year Babiš lost elections, actually with the active help of good investigative journalists, because I remember that only a couple of days before the election, then there was an excellent investigation about his use of offshore companies. So basically, he didn't manage to overtake the free press completely. But Johana, how the situation is changing? Because I remember that Petr Fiala gave some promises about improving the media environment and reforming even some of the laws. Is it happening in the Czech Republic now?
Thank you for the invitation. I have to say that I can tell you some good news from the Czech Republic. Well, we have democratic government with all its problems. And first, I can start with one personal thing. Yes, there is a big change for us, because Form 24, after 6 years, can go to the press conferences. We can ask the politicians, and what is the best, we have the replies. So it's really, really big thing for us. But of course, the main thing is the war. So some steps are maybe slower than we thought they will be, but the government tries to fight against disinformation, especially Russian disinformation. As many of you know, that the government has a coordinator, Michał, who was in IPI before. And also the government wants to make some changes in public media, because they want to change the way how the politicians vote the members to the controlling organs of this media. And in the next years, they will be voted not only by the Chamber of Deputies, but also by the Senate. So it's much better that after one elections, there won't be just big change good for new government. Well, but as I said, the main thing is the war, and Andrej Babiš didn't disappear. He has the 30% of the Czech media market, and he very well cooperates with the disinformation scene. His media are really, really pro-Russian and against especially Ukrainian refugees, because Czech Republic has 30,000 of the refugees, and also there are problems with the high prices for many people it's hard time, but of course there is a war. And I can say that since today in the Czech Republic, there are big boards and billboards with people who say it was better time when Babiš was there because the new government speaks about values, but we don't have money. So the disinformation scene is still working, but I can mention that the owner of the domain closed some pro-Russian websites, I think about 8 websites. And yes, it was a good news when the war started, but we have to be careful because I think that closing the websites is still very hard questions for everybody. So in the Czech Republic, the situation is better. In Hungary, Poland, and the other countries, but we will have presidential election in the beginning of the next year, and I think it will be a really hard time, especially when the war will continue.
Thank you, Johana. What you just said about the provider of web provider switching off the pro-Russian sites, it's a very interesting case study, and we will return to it in the next round of questions. But I would like to turn now to Michał, because we know that Poland has similar media freedom pains like Hungary does. And the government, the Polish government, is really a strong ally of Viktor Orbán. However, the war in Ukraine brought in a split because the narratives of the two governments differ greatly. Michał, if you could elaborate a little bit on how the war on Ukraine has changed the governmental narrative. Did it change in any way the functioning of the press, and how does it reflect on the situation of the independent media? Also in reflection to the European Union seemingly being prepared to push aside some of the rule of law issues in return for Poland's right narrative about the Ukrainian war. Please, the floor is yours.
Your last remark is, I'm not sure if it is correct, because yes, Poland is about to get a very big chunk of money to take care of refugees, but because we have now good press in the West, doesn't mean that Brussels will forget about the problems with the rule of law in Poland, both in case of recovery fund, which is suspended for Poland, and a possible introduction of this mechanism, which has already been introduced in case of Hungary. Money can be paid only to democratic countries, in short, of course. Going back to the situation in the media, the war paradoxically helped a bit. The thing is that in Poland we have 3 main TV stations sharing the market in 3. Well, their share is falling all the time, but in terms of because of streaming and other factors, but in terms of news, they are really the main source of information for majority of Poles, and their share is split more or less equally in 3 parts. One is the government TV station, TVP, which has 2 channels full of news programming, and they are more or less like Pierwszy Kanał w Rosji or Russia or NTV. This propaganda is brutal, stupid, but it seems that it is working because they are not changing it. So they are content with this, and my choice is not to watch them. The other channel is Polsat News, which is neutral, I would say. They are not presenting any propaganda, but they are also not criticizing the government. And there is the third one, which is TVN, a private station created by Polish businessmen, now owned by Warner Brothers Discovery. And in late autumn, the government was, the ruling party, Law and Justice, managed to pass through the parliament a law which might end the independence of TVN without getting into details. But because of the coming war, Americans who are treating Poland like pariahs because the Polish government and Polish president didn't welcome, to say the least, Mr. Biden, and Poland was simply ignored by the US. But when they realized that war was coming, it was sometime in November last year, and Poland is geographically the most important country on the eastern flank of NATO in the context of the Ukrainian war. They managed to convince Mr. Duda, the president, to return on the path of democracy, and unexpectedly he vetoed this law against TVN. After which he was, they started inviting him to the table, discussion table. Poland now is a leader of support for regional leader of support for Ukraine, and so in terms of media, we are well, these totally independent, very critical about the government channel TVN and its round-the-clock channel TVN 24 managed to keep its independence. So we see this paradox. On the other hand, we have quite a few independent newspapers in Poland, which have been attacked by the government, but so far so good, nothing happened. And there are also two major portals, one of which is Wirtualna Polska, which is more commercial than Onet, in which I work. Onet, they both share similar number of audience, and both are independent from the government, with, so to say, Wirtualna Polska not being too keen always to criticize the government, but it's not a problem. You know, you cannot complain about somebody not being very critical. At least they are not lying. So this is the situation, and so you can see the influence of the Ukrainian war, indirect influence on Polish media. On the other hand, the sheer fact of the war in the West, in the East, in Ukraine, results with less differences in the media. You will see same reports or similar reports with similar commentary on practically all media. There is no mainstream media which would be supporting Russia in this war. The sentiment among Poles is great majority against Russia and in support of Ukraine. So in this respect, we can say that we have free media.
Michał, thank you so much for your explanation and also for your reaction to my aphoristic comment on or speculation on EU approach to Poland. It's an interesting issue, and my colleagues widely discuss that. But let's take a look at Russian troll factories and Russian propaganda warfare, which was completely unleashed after the war in Ukraine has broken out. And I realized that it's a weird question to ask from Márton, because in Hungary, actually, the state media and the Fidesz media is the one who spreads the propaganda. But still, I would like to know, and our audience as well, like how the Russian influence and the Russian troll factories, if this is a problem in Hungary at all, or how the discourse on the war in Ukraine looks like, and if and I assume you are doing like debunking work, that you try to put the propaganda lies and explain them and reveal their goal. But how do you manage to do it with your media, which is already under so much strain?
Well, our media, we handle it another way, because in the migration crisis, I had the feeling to always run behind them and debunk them doesn't really help our readers and doesn't help our coverage. So it's more the proof of an liberal elite which denies the problems. So that's why we somehow are less keen on always debunking the lies the propaganda media is bringing. And yes, you are right. The Russian trolls are having it an easy way here in Hungary, because part of the government media is having second thoughts about the Western version of the war, or having second questions about who committed the crimes in Bucha. So you can read unbelievable texts, for example, from Zsolt Bayer, who is a party member of Fidesz and one of the main opinion writers of the pro-Hungarian propaganda media. He is actually, sharing this idea, this notion that somehow pro-Russia was forced into attacking Ukraine to somehow restore its security interest. So the idea how much the US has provocated Russia into this crisis is something you can read in the Hungarian propaganda media a lot, and it is very hard to position yourselves against it. So if you are willing to go down that path, to always be the one who is saying that's not true, it's not a silent whisper, as in a lot of other places. This is, it comes into your face from a lot of channels. We had a survey in our paper that that the majority of the Fidesz voters, so the voters of the ruling party, they believe that Russia is only following its righteous interest in Ukraine, so that those who could decide the question, there was a 43 to 37% advantage for those who thought that Russia is right in this war and voting Fidesz. Now this shows how deeply contaminated the minds of those happens to be who live under this bubble of Hungarian state propaganda. I somewhere read, if you are fed with the story for years that somehow a Western hidden empire wants to destroy the Eastern European way of life. It wants to destroy the traditional way of life which still exists in Hungary, in Eastern Europe, and in Russia, and in the Orthodoxy. Why would you believe that in the case of war, this is not the same story yet again? You know, that if you were fed that migration is somehow a conspiracy by the West, if you thought that the pandemic was a conspiracy of the West, why would you switch on in the question of war to the solution that now it's not a conspiracy of the West, but it's Russia's wrongdoing. So a part of the Hungarian society is deeply affected by a lie which was told too many times over the 12 years. This actually could cause some problems for Orbán as well, because he can't really distance himself from his own voters who think that Russia is right, although his self-interest would perhaps be to move in the other direction, knowing how hard the financing of Hungary is going to be, and that he would need the European Union's money to maintain the living standards Hungarians achieved over the last decade. So it's a difficult thing for them. They are a bit trapped in their own lies. But on the other side, I don't think that a constant debunking is for us the right answer. Actually, I sometimes feel an article 5 arguments why Bucha can't be a staged genocide is false, because it allows the notion that it could be a staged thing. So that even by playing this role of the liberal media to always know it better, to always be on the high horse and looking down to people and telling them why they shouldn't have second thoughts to anything, is sometimes in a strange psychological circle actually helps to spread the lie. So that's why I would rather go to quality reporting on the war and not on looking how the others are reporting on it.
Yeah, that's a tough call, and I can completely understand that in a country where really the majority of media does the propaganda, that you really have to come up with your own stories. Ali, briefly, how do you cope with the Russian propaganda and troll factories, and how do you decide about what to debunk and what to just ignore?
Okay, I will tell you something about naive leftist narrative that appeared from time to time in Slovenia. So first, what Putin did was or is a crime. But second part of this narrative looks like this. But we must not forget about Azov battalion. We must not forget about pro-Nazi groups in Ukraine. And from time to time, this narrative appears in some commentaries, even in serious media. Fortunately, we have many field reporters in Ukraine, and besides this, we have many very good experts who used to work or are still working as correspondents from Russia, and they are very good in understanding how Russian propaganda is acting, and they are able to explain the way of Russian propaganda to public in Slovenia. So this narrative, in which first Putin committed crimes, second, but we must not forget about Azov battalion and Nazis and so on. This narrative is not very strong in Slovenia. Second part that I have to mention is about the way how Prime Minister Janša is acting. He insulted the winner of election, that he's pro-Russian guy, and he started. He was involved in a Twitter debate with the most important Western media about the label that the winner of elections in Slovenia is green liberal. So Janša claimed that he's pro-Russian, and it's once again one of Janša's pure fabrication of facts. But due to the fact that Janša lost the elections, nobody care very much about this attempt to put a label of being pro-Russians to new ruling coalition. People do not care about this.
Thank you, Ali. And Johana, you already mentioned that in the Czech Republic, actually not based on law, but by recommendation of the government, one of those providers of internet sites turned off several propaganda media. It happened in Slovakia, but they did it based on law. So was it a discussion around it? What was the response of the Czech society, and was it a reason for concern for the media?
Were closed, and I have to say that it was pure pro-Russian propaganda. You know, there, first of all, it was Sputnik and some other websites. When you go there, some articles were really crazy, not only propaganda, but really, really crazy. Well, yes, there was a big discussion about it, because I think the good news is that it was not closed by the government, because, you know, it's really hard to imagine that any government can close some website, because we had 8 years with Babiš. So I can assure you that when he got this opportunity, he wouldn't close any pro-Russian website, but many independent websites, as we are. So it was the decision of the provider, but of course, I think there will be some consequences because I think that the court could say that, the final word about it. And I have to say that, yes, some websites were closed, but the Russian propaganda in the Czech Republic is still very spread. I'm very sorry that I have to say that, but when I read some so-called conservative website or media which are independent and their journalists in past wrote good articles, now I read them and I read, well, who did the massacre in Bucha? Wasn't that the Russians or Ukrainians? We don't know. And you know, it is big media and they called them conservative, but is conservative pro-Russian? I don't know, maybe yes. In the Czech Republic it is. And next problem is the third commercial television in the Czech Republic, FTV Prima. They have a FTV Prima program and FTV Prima CNN. I don't know how it happened that they can use the CNN mark, but when you watch their program, it's pure Russian propaganda. It was when there was a pandemic, it was anti-vaxxer propaganda, and now it's pro-Russian propaganda. So some websites are closed, but Russian propaganda didn't lose at all in the Czech Republic.
I completely understand your concerns. In Slovakia, it was revealed that the Russian embassy actually paid cash to some of the contributors to these pro-Russian websites. So I think our region is really infiltrated with this propaganda. And I assume that in Poland, this was a serious problem even before the war. And along with Finland, Poland was one of the main targets of Russian propaganda. Michał, how do you cope with it? And what is the situation with these troll factories right now in Poland?
You know, as I said previously, in Poland, there is no mainstream media outlet which would be openly pro-Russian, not even neutral. Mainstream, I mean, those who are even very strongly pro-government and used to be anti-Ukrainian. They are still more or less anti-Ukrainian, but it is, you know, within the frames of discourse. You can hate them, but still they are presenting their views, however ugly they are. And but of course there is Russian trolling in Poland. It's several dozen smaller websites are identified as Russian outlets. They would have, some of them would have several thousand users, viewers, but they are really a margin. They are. It would be really hard in Poland to make open pro-Russia propaganda because you know, it's the spirit of this country, I would say. As concerns trolls, they of course exist. They exist in especially on Twitter. They are very smart, some of them, but it's, you know, there's nothing new, nothing which you wouldn't see in the past. Of course, they are the same people who were previously anti-vaccine or anti-European Union, Eurosceptics. So it's the same crowd, and I don't think they are growing their audience in these circumstances. Rather on the contrary, because while before the war, in fact, many, first of all, Sputnik was available in Poland, not anymore. RIA Novosti and things like that, they are not available anymore. But some media were in a way supportive of Russia, and they were tolerated. Now I don't think they would dare to continue pro-Russian propaganda. So this is one of the defeats of Kremlin, that not only they strengthened NATO, European Union, but also they managed to limit pro-Russian propaganda in Poland.
Thank you so much, Michał. And now we can turn to the floor and take questions from our audience. We already have one pretty long question for Márton, so I will read it. When you look at Hungarian state TV, it is, and it has been for some years, so blatantly biased. It raises the question, is Viktor Orbán the cause, or he's the product of the lack of questioning attitude among the Hungarian population? As Márton noted, Hungary has one of the worst pandemic records in Europe, actually the fourth worst in terms of death per capita. The facts are available, though the course of the government stressed the inoculation rate, not the deaths. But if 50% of the people don't question this bias, what hope is there if Viktor Orbán left the scene? Wouldn't someone else just come along, fill his shoes, and possibly be even worse than him? Márton?
Well, first of all, the facts are not available. The Hungarian government was giving out very few numbers and data to the pandemic, and as it turned difficult for them, they've stopped publishing it really in the news. So in the state media, you weren't really hearing anything about the pandemic, or you were hearing that the pandemic is raging elsewhere, or you had stories about the horrible migration situation in the outskirts of the Swedish town of Malmö, but you didn't get the data that 200 people died of COVID the previous day in Hungary. For a while, I was looking for the number of COVID deaths in the leading newspaper of the Hungarian government, Magyar Nemzet. So every day I opened it. It's 20 pages. And I wanted to find the data. I was prepared to read that this is not that much if we compare to this or that, or somehow just a very short news somewhere at the bottom of page 5. But actually, they were not publishing it at all. So there were more than 100 Hungarian COVID deaths a day. And day after day, Magyar Nemzet didn't bring the number. So the facts were only available for those who were seeking for it. And let's face it, who wanted to seek COVID news after a while? I didn't. So it was only frustrating. And I had the feeling that this was the first time that the story told in the propaganda media was the better version of the truth, as we were, having. Because as a news outlet, you rely on facts, and those facts were not available, or only in a small number. We were not able to get into hospitals. We were not allowed to have interviews with doctors or hospital directors. So we only had questions. We didn't have answers. And of course, as a journalist, this is how far you can go if you don't get answers. You just publish your questions to somehow bring light to the issue. But this is, for a reader, a very hard story to swallow. So this is not something I would want to read if I'm not in the news. That somehow all I get is questions, questions, and questions. So I wouldn't blame it on the people. I wouldn't blame it because most of us really want to believe, and if you are less educated or you learned that state TV is always telling you the facts of the state, you don't start to question everything. I would be interested if the German population, a third of the German population, would get nothing else, only the same quality of news the Hungarian population gets. How much of them would revolt against it? How much would, after 12 years of constant lying, second guess what is told to them? So I don't like the idea to blame it on the people, that they somehow would be stupid or not capable of finding the truth. They are hidden and they are kept under a bubble.
Thank you, Márton, so much. We have one last question because we aim to finish at 5:10. I will ask the question, and if any of you would like to answer, just signal that you have an opinion on that question. How do the panelists see the EU's role in combating media capture and Russian disinformation, particularly banning RT, the impact of the Digital Services Act, and prospects for a Media Freedom Act that aspires to protect regulatory independence, media pluralism, and generally combat media capture? Who would like to answer the question? Yes, Johana?
The first part of the question about the combating media capture, and when I speak about it from the Czech view, I have to say that European Union did not do what it should, because Andrej Babiš is in the most pro-European fraction in the European Parliament, and I have to say that's a joke. And European Union still sends him money, and they are financing the media capture in the Czech Republic. So I think it is not a good news about the European Union.
Thank you. Has anyone else opinion on that question? If not, I will thank you all, dear colleagues who joined us today, and you shared your views on very difficult dilemmas and questions we have to cope with every day, while really juggling with covering the war and assuming new roles, even trying to express solidarity with our colleagues in Ukraine. I know that several media outlets are hiring Ukrainian journalists and trying to give them some hope for that they don't have to quit their journalistic job. So thank you for all that. I also would like to thank IPI for marking the Press Freedom Day and making sure that this region is really heard in the whole of Europe, because I think that what is happening now in the Central and Eastern European region, that can really significantly impact the line and the map of the whole Europe.